Jack Burton and the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Pork Chop Podcast. Hi, my name is Rich Matthews and I'm joined again by my co-host, Horror Helmer and defected Frenchman, Jonathan Zarin. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Très bien, merci.
Ooh. That's all my French you've got. So this is a podcast hosted by two grumpy film nerds, grumpily grumping through chats about cult movies, classic films, filmmakers and all of that sort of stuff. We're continuing in episode 2 our deep dive into the work of John Carpenter, whose film Big Trouble in Little China, of course, has given us the name of the podcast. As ever, hopefully we'll find something interesting to say, and if anyone listens, we will consider doing another filmmaker after we've done the first 10 episodes. So, who knows? Onwards with episode 2, which is Halloween and Someone's Watching Me. I'm right in saying that we both hadn't seen Someone's Watching Me until doing this, right? Yeah. I have a guilty confession. I'm not even sure I knew it existed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I knew about Elvis, which we'll come to, the TV movie, but I just passed me by entirely. But we'll get to that in a minute. First off, of course, we have Halloween. Is it John Carpenter's most famous film? Probably now.
Yeah.
Released on the 25th of October in 1978 in the US, and the following January 25th in 1979 in the UK. It was made by Compass International Pictures, which continues the theme of going bust in 1981, not long after Halloween was made, but not before they managed to make Roller Boogie. And Falcon International Pictures, also short-lived. It stars Donald Pleasance as Dr. Samuel Loomis, Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, PJ Soles as Linda, and, returning from Assault on Precinct 13, Nancy Loomis as Annie. Plus, future director of Dennis the Menace, Nick Castle as The Shape, aka Michael Myers. It was written by John Carpenter, joined this time by Deborah Hill, a key collaboration for the filmmaker, and crucially for me, we'll talk about this a bit later, but it is shot by Dean Cundy, one of the greatest cinematographers in American cinema. Music is again by Carpenter himself. The film is 91 minutes long, nice and tight and lean. The budget was between £300,000 and £325,000. This time we have a box office figure. It being Halloween, therefore now technically a franchise in bunny ears. It made $70 million on its initial release in the US. So in modern money, in 2023 coin, that's a budget of $1.5 million and a return of more than $300 million. That's what we call a good profit ratio. In October 1978, when it was released, its primary competition was Midnight Express, The Wiz.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, The Wiz. It's not a film about
No.
Going South, the Jack Nicholson movie. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. There's a good face. Jonathan just pulled a very good face at that.
Yeah.
Not Return of the Killer Tomatoes. Attack of the Killer. Watership Down. Oh, the poor rabbits. Oh. But interestingly, ordinarily we'll just stick to the month it came out, but a month later, Zarchi's I Spit on Your Grave was released. It's worth noting that, I think, because it means we're in a certain sweet spot for horror at this point, and specifically horror that's grounded in sort of a reality that perhaps had been missing up to this point.
Certainly become more graphic.
Yeah.
Stage, yeah.
Halloween, let's face it, you can get Halloween everywhere. It's the first of the John Carpenter films that is not difficult to find necessarily. If you've got a subscription to Stars, you can watch it there, or you can watch it for free with our breaks on Pluto TV. Now, unsurprisingly, the Rotten Tomatoes score for Halloween is 96%, but now the audience score has risen a bit more to meet it with 89%. The consensus is scary, suspenseful, and viscerally thrilling. Halloween set the standard for modern horror films. It's a very broad use of the term horror, and we will probably be a bit more specific as we talk about it. Pauline Kael, who we mentioned in the previous episode as not being the biggest fan of John Carpenter, said, "Carpenter doesn't seem to have any life outside the movies. One can trace almost every idea on the screen to directors such as Hitchcock and Brian De Palma and to the Val Lewton productions. Maybe when a horror film is stripped of everything but dumb scariness, when it isn't ashamed to revive the stalest device of the genre, the escaped lunatic, it satisfies part of the audience in a more basic, childish way than sophisticated horror pictures do." But
Elevated horror before its time.
well, interesting, yes. I find myself wanting to go back into her reviews and see which horror film she rate The Exorcist. I can't remember, or was she talking, about 1950s Robert Wise films?
Interesting point. You'd have to check that.
Yeah, but in contrast, Roger Ebert, the other equivalent of the era, who at least, unlike Pauline Kael, who briefly worked as a consultant for Paramount Pictures, but Roger Ebert did, of course, write some films, basically titty movies. Well, but high-end. Can you have high-end titty movies?
Yeah.
Russ Meyer, does he count as...
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, Russ Meyer, yeah. I
Yeah,
have a friend that could talk to you about Russ Meyer for hours on
Which
end.
was the one that Ebert wrote? Was it Valley of the Ultra Vixens? Or Beneath the Valley of the Dolls?
Yeah.
So he said of Halloween, a visceral experience. We aren't seeing the movie, we're having it happen to us. It's frightening. Maybe you don't like movies that are really scary. Then don't see this one. It kind of feels like less of a novelty talking about Halloween
Yeah,
now.
definitely. It's been talked to death.
There was a period where, when I was in my 20s, where it was, have you seen Halloween? It was talked about with reverence, and it was this... But now it's it's got that tang of, that bittersweet taste of franchise to it.
Well, yeah, that does not help. That's for sure, especially with what happened to it. I mean, nothing new, I suppose. It's been going weak, pretty much going weak since Halloween 3.
So I was saying, don't you say a word about Season of the Witch. I knew that's where you were going.
No, I love Halloween 3, so...
I'll never look at a pumpkin mask the same again.
I love Halloween 3, so no problem at all. But, no, I mean, franchises, that's a whole completely different ball game. But what's interesting in those reviews is actually Pauline Kael makes a much better, much more interesting point than Roger Ebert. But the problem is that she doesn't figure out that these are qualities. Yeah. That's the problem.
She's the wrong side of the argument, but she's making...
But she's making the right argument.
Yeah,
so she clearly understood the film. That's one thing you can't accuse her of. It's just that she kind of missed that was the point.
Yes. So, just before we progress, I'll just summarise Halloween as if I need to. But, to quote Pauline Kael, escaped lunatic Michael Myers defends on the little town of Haddonfield, where he had been imprisoned as a... Was he 9? 6?
Yeah.
He was little. For murdering his sister, in a bravura point of view continuous shot at the beginning. Absolutely tip top single shot point of view. No better use of it anywhere. Anyway, and then he unfortunately sets his sights on young Laurie Strode because she comes up to drop some keys at his childhood house, and from that point on, she is the new object of his affection.
Yeah, it's a love story.
Yeah, it's a love story where he wants to penetrate her with his knife, basically. So what follows is by now a standard series of tropes, for better or for worse. Essentially sets the modern template for the slasher. It didn't start it, that's a common misconception, but it did purify it, to continue the theme of the previous episode. Yeah. To an extent that it's seen as the basically the father, the genesis of the modern stalk and slash. So when did you first see it?
You know what? I must have been around 12, I think, 13, and again Swiss TV, late night movie.
I didn't know that. This is a new thing.
Yeah, no, this is. I've seen everything on this channel, TSR, so Télévision Suisse Romande, and the thing is, that obviously geographically you only get it in certain area of France where I grew up, which was 15 minutes from the Swiss border. You would get the Swiss channel on Saturday at midnight, a genre film that was never announced, so you never knew what was going to pop on your screen.
It's like a surprise movie.
Yeah.
Oh, that's quite cool.
And because it was before the age of the internet and all that stuff, so you had no way of finding out unless you went to Switzerland to buy the Swiss TV program, and so I ended up seeing a ton genre films on this channel. With Dawn of the Dead I discovered on this channel, Nightmare on Elm Street I discovered on this channel, Texas Chainsaw Massacre I discovered on this channel.
Oh, you lucky devil! That was banned here.
Yeah, well, there you go. See,
Didn't see that till 1999.
And then some weird shit, you know, like Creepazoid and yeah, it's
Creepazoid. Wow,
yeah.
that's a video nasty flashback.
Creepazoid.
Oh,
That's an amazing.
That's up there with Inseminator. You seen that?
In Seminoid.
Inseminoid.
Seminoid. Yeah. No,
the British
absolutely.
horror.
Oh yeah. Oh, weird.
Oh,
Film, yeah.
Why Inseminator? That's a different thing. That's a porn
Yeah,
version of the Terminator.
I don't know what you've been working.
That is a porn version of the Terminator where he said no, the logic still applies. Instead of trying to kill her before she conceives,
He tries to stab her.
he tries to
His
impregnate her. No, tries to impregnate her before Kyle Reese can. It is actually logical. Because clearly she's ovulating because she conceives John Connor.
Yeah.
So instead, it totally makes sense.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Not amazing. No,
but it's
no.
yeah. I actually, weirdly, I was thinking about this. I can't remember when I first saw it. And I think that is a product of its ubiquity now. That, for whatever reason, I just sort of saw it. I can't work out whether that's because, I mean, I definitely had a watershed moment where I started to actively seek out all the slashers, and I saw Nightmare on Elm Street, the Friday the 13th, all of them in a big block. And what's interesting, and probably something that we'll come on to discuss in more detail, is how unbloody Halloween is, and it's up there with Psycho and Texas Chainsaw, actually, in terms of films that are misappropriated as being bloody and gory. They're not.
Yeah.
But they're so viscerally powerful in their scares and their tension and their disturbing nature that you sort of project your own gore as such, which is the same thing that Tarantino claims to exploit in Reservoir Dogs with the ear cut, even though it's blood everywhere. So I don't know when I first saw it, and I am guilty for a long time, I think, of it blurring of all the John Carpenter. I have a very clear image of all the John Carpenter films, except perhaps this one. Now,
I think it's been diluted by the amount of sequels and remakes and
I mean, even Halloween 2, which Carpenter had a hand in, it starts there, and I just I mean, and certainly by the time Scream came out, Halloween just sat in that bracket of slasher horror, which that was pastiching for me. Now, I think I've revised my opinion as I've got older again, and certainly watching it, reviewing it for this podcast again, it would just pointed out how great it is. But again, you just sort of didn't feel like watching it for ages because you think you've got all these sequels, just bumbling out, which completely don't understand what makes Halloween great.
No, and I mean, I think even if they did, that's what we talked about earlier. Is the only way that that you can be Halloween is by being Halloween. That's the thing. So whatever you do to it, you're just going to detract from what it actually is, because again, it's been boiled down to such a pure form that whatever you add on top of it, it takes away.
Yeah.
And every subsequent following film and except for number 3, which goes in a completely different direction,
And it's kind of good that it does.
Right?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
adds nothing.
No.
This whole, that's why they have to go into endless plots of satanic cults and sisters and family and
And also
there's nothing to add.
The hint of supernatural. There's just a hint of it in this, and it's just ambiguous, and it's not.
Yeah.
And they just have to they go 500 miles with that to make him indestructible, and it's so. I mean, whereas part of me wants to go on to Wikipedia and put its plot synopsis. Says escaped lunatic stalks nepo baby.
Yeah.
Essentially, because it's like, wow. And the only thing that makes me sad about the sequels, weirdly, about the modern ones, the most recent ones, is the fact that Carpenter scored them, and I can't imagine that's a satisfying experience for him.
I think he's reached a point where he would,
Just wants to
as he says himself, a magic thing happens. He extends his hand and the check lands in it. And I think for someone who took so much shit on top of their heads, I think that's a good way to be at that stage for him. Yeah.
So getting back to the basics to the core of it, what is it that makes Halloween great?
Again, I would argue that it's the recuperation of concepts that he boils down to a point where they are at their purest, and you cannot take away or add anything without profoundly disrupting its nature. So it's nothing new as such, if you like. It's not like the idea is new. You get plenty of example in gothic film, horror films before that of the murderer who comes to town. Yeah, even
The
a
Shadow.
mask. Well,
The
absolutely.
Shadow. Yeah.
But it's how he takes that idea and he goes with it to the point where if you even remove a gram from its weight, that's it. You're in complete abstraction, and he just keeps it on that edge where you can't add or remove anything from it without changing it completely. And that's basically what happens after that with all the sequels and the Rob Zombie remake, which, by the way, I actually like. No,
it's going to be our first note of
no.
disagreement.
Look, this is interesting. I like it for what it's.
Yeah, if it wasn't Halloween,
Right, that's my point.
but it isn't. It's called Halloween.
It's a profound misunderstanding of what makes Michael Myers. Right?
Yeah.
There's no origins. There's no. It can't be anything like that because it's a concept. It's an idea.
But they've done that with Leatherface. The same thing.
Yeah.
Just. And that
the issue as well when you boil down things to their core concept, to their core idea, is that everything gets taken as something you can apparently build upon. It's kind of iconic that at the end he's not here.
Yeah.
But instead of understanding that this is part of the idea that it won't die, it can't die, it's not real, it's not a real thing.
Yeah.
It gets taken as, aha, there is more.
Yes, and that's interesting because so. Again, for hopefully spoilers, but I mean, if you listen to this,
Of course.
yeah. But at the end of the film, having seemingly been stabbed and shot and blah blah blah, he falls out a window, so should be dead, and then he disappears. You see, it's interesting because I think before the franchise era, you didn't think it meant that he was still alive. What I thought in terms of the sort of the diegetic, textual, just within the film itself, I went, was he real?
Yeah.
Because
That's the same question that she asks.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Was he the
but
boogeyman?
we live in a world where, yes, of course he's real because he's supernatural. He's a ghost. Whereas no, arguably not. And the perversity of creating an origin story when Halloween has an origin story in it, it's just you don't need to explain it. There's something chilling to the very bones about a kid who, unfortunately, is evil. And I mean, bear in mind, this is a film which. Everything Donald Pleasance says should be ridiculous. Because he says to me, he had dead black eyes. The eyes were evil. And it's like, oh my God, it should be so arch and so silly. But Carpenter knows how to pitch it. And that whole section, the section which, watching it again this time, that struck me more than the cliched stuff that's great, i.e. the stuff with Laurie, the stuff with the teens, the stuff with the shape in the distance and the looking through the windows again, more smashed glass, blah blah blah, is the drive up to the insane asylum, because there's so much happening in that, and yet it plays very. It's like a throwaway, but it's in fact, and the moment when he comes up and you suddenly see the escaped lunatics, the escaped asylum patients, and they don't ever really show you them. They're just passed in headlights.
It's very similar to the way that he did the gangs in Assault on Pretense.
Exactly, and the way the nurse says they're not supposed to be out now. It's so witty, but like no, and that then is backed up by the line, which again you wouldn't get away with now because people wanted to explain, is when he says he doesn't know how to drive. Well, apparently he did pretty well last night. Someone must have taught him. And also how there's that disconnect with how he looks before he dons his outfit. So he's like a spider. When you see him, there's glimpses of him. He's crawling, he's feral, he's jumping around. You just see limbs and bits and pieces, and he's quick. But as soon as he puts on the overalls and the Kirk mask, the Shatner mask, he becomes more of a zombie. He becomes a unremitting force instead of a sort of lunatic, crazy.
He's boiled down to a core idea.
Because you've established and this is again in terms of filmmaking masterclass, he's established that he can be quick, that he can get around, so you don't need to see him do it.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. But it's also this whole because we didn't talk about that, but what's interesting is he's also a profoundly American filmmaker. And so there is always that idea of deconstructing the kind of American way of life in everything that he does.
The machismo, the stoic.
Absolutely, and then later on he starts deconstructing his own deconstructions in a way, because he starts making meta films about making films in America.
Well, Jack Burton is a complete subversion of that idea.
Definitely. But what's great about Halloween is this whole idea of evil growing in the middle of suburban America. That's a really interesting idea, especially once you start pulling back so much to what's essentially an archetype, that it becomes less, but because of that it becomes more. It becomes something that becomes universally understood.
Yeah, to go back to your point about in the previous episode about Assault on Precinct 13 being kind of punk, I think his statement here is, it's not that there's something rotten underneath in suburbia. Suburbia is rotten, and maybe there needs to be a force of nature that comes in and culls this generation of rotten adolescents who are spoiled, indulgent, just consumers.
Yeah.
And while I don't think he necessarily thought of it in those brazen terms, he might have. He is the kind of man that would actually hold those sort of opinions. But I think from a bit of distance and from where we are now, and from the 70s suburbia that he picks at is a merchandise version of the 50s, and that represented oppression and repression and prejudice. And all we've done in the world of Halloween, all you've done is add flares and pigtails to that, and so he brings in a very American menace, which is the unbridled masculine, into a cliched feminine world. But then crucially, because it's Carpenter, he flips that, which is, he does have female victims. This film does have some of his most broadly traditional female characters, but Laurie to some degree redeems that, even though there is no film more often. And it was awesome seeing this with my daughter, because she kept going, "Don't stop dropping the knife!" And it's true. That is one of the dumbest things you'll ever see. Is like, just hold on to the damn... Why? She drops it like 3 times.
But you...
Not drops it either. Not scared. Puts it down.
Yeah. But you said that back to when it was done, and then it wasn't seen 50 million times. Then that's the thing. That's the thing about it. And of course, on your point of again, and Kel figured it out as well, is that Carpenter understands America through cinema,
movies.
and that's true. That's the truth.
Yeah, to quote Baudrillard, we're at the point where people hadn't quite perceived that we were at that point where the symbol was dictating the culture. Instead of it reflecting culture, it was starting to dictate culture, and that's definitely this late 70s is the tipping point. In America, primarily, but then where America goes, the Western world goes. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Oh, that's a non sequitur. That's silenced him.
No, it's... what else am I going to say? It's true.
Yeah. And so it's... When it's only thought of as a slasher, you're doing a great disservice to it. Because it's a slasher in content and in effectiveness, but it's actually, as with anything Carpenter does from any point on, it's absolutely riddled with a commentary on cinema, a commentary on America, a commentary on consumption. Laurie Strode and what she became, she should never have become that. She didn't need to be bastardized. She wasn't Ellen Ripley. She should never have, in the way that Ellen Ripley in Aliens is actually a character progression, in Laurie Strode it's not.
No, it can't be.
No,
it can't be, because I, if I'm honest, I would barely call them characters. Actually, this is
I think you're right.
But it's true.
Yeah.
They're ideas.
Yeah, there's a bubblegum chewing.
They're ideas, they're notions, but they're not actual characters. And that's what's interesting is that when again, it's this idea of abstraction. I think this is what I love with John Carpenter, is that this just you can't touch it anymore without changing it.
Yeah.
It's
and he also subverts.
You have to transform it.
He subverts things in here that your expectation just as you're going through the plot, in the sense. So the moment the girl gets trapped in the window, arse facing camera, it's begging for something to happen to her, and nothing does. In Rob Zombie's film, she's probably getting stabbed in the bum by a knife, to do an on the nose metaphor. But in here, it's vaguely, it is sexualized, but he's not, unlike other slashers in this era, especially Friday the 13th. He doesn't punish for the sexual in the same way. There is one teenage duo who are at it, the only ones you actually see having sex. They do die, but that isn't the reason they die.
No,
they're in the wrong house, and they shouldn't be there. And it's more and you're right about them not really being characters. They're sort of branches of the Laurie tree, and they're being pruned.
Yes,
just to get to her. And it is, in terms of the joke about being a romance, it is kind of his courting of her. That he could have killed Laurie straight away.
Yeah, of course.
But he doesn't.
He does not.
Because
they're opposition of the same face. That, I think that's the point, and that is the and in a way you can't take that away from the latest films. Halloween ends and Halloween kills. Is that what the other way around? Halloween kills, Halloween ends. They've figured it out that Michael and Laurie were two sides of the same coin. But the problem is again, you want to say yes. So anyone who's seen the first Halloween has figured that out in
and as soon as you bring her too near him, you're missing the point. Yeah.
Exactly, because it's about the chase.
Yeah. And
that's why it's perfectly, it wasn't open ended.
No.
It's just that it's a story that will never end. Literally, there's no end to that story.
I think through today's eyes, you could really make a good case for it being a study of toxic masculinity. But at the time when it was made, that sort of discourse wasn't around about that. But nonetheless, Carpenter, being ahead of his time, pinpointed something. The masculine as threat, and his characters do walk that line, pretty much always, except when they wish they did in Jack Burton's case, where in fact he turns out to be incredibly benign and ineffectual. God bless him, and zero threat to any woman in reality.
Yeah.
But Carpenter's work does maintain that, even in The Thing, which shows you what happens to men when the female is absent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absence is
when feminine is removed, men.
Which is why the sequel remake was nonsensical in itself.
Because you introduced a woman.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it also it completely removes the metaphor of the creature itself. Again, we'll talk about this when we get to The Thing. But that's essentially a creation creature. Mm-hmm. A mother. The only feminine presence in The Thing is the alien. I have to remember to bring that up when we talk about that.
We'll talk about that next time, yeah.
So Halloween, there's a lot in there, and that's why it's so kind of sad that it feels like the current discourse is reductive.
But it's kind of like Rocky or First Blood, Oh,
they're great films, both of them.
Yeah.
Love them both.
Great films that have been lessened by declining franchises.
Yeah. Although the argument I would make, my biggest sequel defender is Rambo: First Blood Part 2. I love that.
Yeah,
film.
but I love
look,
it's a fun film, but I just don't think it stands in the same. I'm happy to watch it. I just have to separate First Blood the same way I have to separate the first Rocky or the first Halloween from their franchises.
I love Rambo: First Blood Part 2, and it's the one I will watch the most. But First Blood is, having recently rewatched it with the family, it is a level above. It's a seriousness of filmmaking. Yeah. And yes, Rocky is exactly right, and it's exactly the same thing going on now with the Creed franchises, which they're perfectly good movies, but they ain't Rocky. And that's the reason that if you're going to talk about the Rocky franchise, the only other film I really rate is Rocky Balboa.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it's the only other time that life and art came close together, and then it became better. Because Stallone needed Rocky Balboa at the same point that Rocky Balboa needed Stallone. If you see what I mean.
Yeah,
Again.
no, absolutely. It's interconnected.
Just like the first one.
No, I agree.
Pork chops. How many pork chops out of 10?
9.
9 again.
Again.
9
yeah,
again.
Definitely.
I'm going to stick with 8. I think.
Again?
Yeah, I know. I was tempted to go to 7, but I just can't quite bring myself to imply that it isn't.
I
As
think
good
it
as
is
it is.
a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Personally, but
Yeah,
I mean, in terms of John Carpenter,
twice we use that word now.
But it is.
It's two of his films we've called masterpieces.
Yeah. He's one of those rare filmmakers who had a really good run for a bit. Yeah.
But spoiler alert, the next film is not. Okay, now it's time for us to listen to what our Zoomer review made of Halloween.
Not so fast, gentlemen.
I really enjoyed it. I've heard about this one because it's a classic. So I kind of knew what to expect a little bit. It sounds really dumb, but I think he does get better with everyone he does. So obviously I think it goes Dark Star, Assault on Precinct 13 and Halloween. You can start to see his music take on a very distinct signature sort of synthy notes that he uses. The action and the suspense is still sort of on the level of Assault on Precinct 13, but it's how he refines his stuff. He likes using the camera as somebody's eyes. So when you walk around a space, it will be from the camera, and most of the time you won't see the person, it will be through their eyes. Lots of filming through windows, so you never see his face.
You do.
Do you? I can't remember seeing his face. That might have also been a thing. You're likely to forget that in favour of the entire thing being faceless. So I think that's quite interesting. I think because so many other horror-ish movies have been based off of Halloween, and so many other faceless killers, if you were watching this as your first Halloween-y sort of movie, yeah, you would be scared. I don't think I'm as scared of it. Because you obviously the tension sort of, and you're looking for stuff. I think that was more of excitement than scared. Obviously the ages are different, so he's trying to portray teenage girls instead of adult women. How they would react would obviously be different, and I think he did that well because again it's from different sort of perspectives, where she's trying to protect the people she cares about, and obviously she's scared out of her mind, because who wouldn't be in that sort of situation? But the difference is she's willing to go against him herself rather than endanger the kids that she's trying to protect, because she now knows her friends are dead in that other house. And there are bits where you've gone, surely you would have noticed that, but obviously in that sort of situation maybe you wouldn't have, but that might just be my perception of stop dropping the knife, because obviously if you're scared you try and keep a very tight grip on the thing that you're holding to protect yourself, and she kept dropping it. But I don't know why. Maybe that was a choice, but I'd still recommend to watch it. Like, for example, if I had a friend over for Halloween and we watched Halloween movies, maybe I would have put that on the list if I'd watched it before now.
So, any thoughts on Nia's feelings about Halloween? Not scary? It's a bit of a shame, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the nature of it means that, you know, it's a trick you can only do once. So you have to start with it, I suppose. That's the idea. Once, you know, it's definitely the sort of thing that if you've seen everything that comes after and amps everything to you know, turns it up to 11, it's gonna start feeling like a little bit tame, probably. But the funny thing is, I also don't think it's been actually equaled in terms of direction and you know.
This was the first time where I had that sort of older generation feeling of they're growing up too quick. Like somehow this is not scary and it should be. And is it just the age of the film? Because if when I was her age in 89, 90, if you'd shown me the equivalent gap, you're talking The Haunting and things like that, and I didn't find those scary. So is it simply that? That's what I started to wonder. Is it just the age of the film?
I don't know, because there are certainly some films before that I still find scary. That maybe I shouldn't, but I think it is, and that's what she says. You know, essentially she says, "Oh yeah, but I've seen all the killer films. You know, that's it's because it's a trick that really only works on a person once." I'm pretty sure that your favorite most scary slasher killer is probably the first one you saw.
Maybe
because after that it's gonna become the same trick done over and over again.
Because I think of this ilk, I think Nightmare on Elm Street was probably the one I saw.
But I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street is when it was new again because then he did something different with it.
And made it overtly fantastical.
Yeah.
But then I also think about how there were the sort of older films which did scare me still were things like Repulsion and that's
scarier when you're an adult.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So interesting. Not a question that would really come up with the next film. So we move on from Halloween to actually a film he made before Halloween. But because we are victim to scheduling, Someone's Watching Me, shot finished shooting literally weeks before Halloween started shooting. It aired on US television on NBC on the 29th of September 1978 and therefore comes in our assessment after Halloween. There is no UK release that I can find record of. I might be wrong, but certainly I, as I said earlier, was more or less unaware of this film. It was made by Warner Brothers Television, so Carpenter's first interaction with a major studio, albeit then a much less respected division. It stars Lauren Hutton as Lee Michael, David Burney as Paul Winkless, future Mrs. Carpenter, Adrienne Barbeau as Sophie, and the ubiquitous Charles Cypher as Gary Hunt. He was in Halloween as well, wasn't he? He was the cop. It's written by Carpenter. It was shot by Robert B. Hauser, so his first film without his Assault on Precinct 13 and Dark Star cinematographer, but certainly not of the calibre of Dean Cundy. It is also the first film in this podcast that wasn't scored by Carpenter, and much will be said of that, I'm sure, coming up. Still 97 minutes long, so pretty lean. Don't know the budget because it was TV at the time. There was no box office to report, so it's more some sort of factual tidbits. The working title was High Rise, fitting enough, and it did sort of remind me of Shivers actually, in terms of what it sort of tried to make the building look like. Carpenter himself said he thought it was a really, really good idea. I had my first experience with television and my first union experience. I got into the Directors Guild through that film. I had a real good time on it, I have to tell you. I met my wife. It was shot in 18 days, which is pretty quick, and filming had finished by April 1978. The star, Lauren Hutton, said, I think it's the best thing I've done. And she might be right about that. 2 weeks later, Halloween started filming, and many of the techniques in Halloween were devised on Someone's Watching Me. Carpenter later said he was very proud of the film, even though it was not one of his better-known works. You can watch it on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV in America. Sadly, you can't get it here. So not that we would ever promote nefarious means of watching IP, but maybe it's the only way. It has, surprisingly, a Rotten Tomatoes score of 86%, but there's no consensus because that basically is like 7 reviews. Audience score of 43%. Carpenter was nominated for the 1979 Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Television Feature or Miniseries for it. And in terms of quotes, the only one which sort of sticks out is the comment, I have strange fears. That's before she talks about being raped by midgets. Her word, not mine. So, yes, she does. Now, this is an interesting one because this is the first one which we've already said, which both of us had never seen before sitting down to watch for this podcast. What are your thoughts?
I think it's an interesting film in terms of seeing Carpenter trying to not learn his craft, but learn his industry, learn his business. I think that's the thing. Learning the business of
how to work in the system.
Working the system of how a film is made. That's the first sign of it. Is it a remarkable film? No, I don't think it is. There are
It's
glimpses.
a lesser work. Yeah.
There are glimpses, like you're talking about the building. I think it's there's an interesting idea of making the building an extension of the character and all that stuff. And there's a play on the Hitchcockian thing that's going to become his trademark. Where all of a sudden he's kind of remaking Rear Window, but he adds another layer by giving her.
Well, it makes an overt statement about being Hitchcockian at the very beginning because the title sequence is basically a rip-off of both music done by Suckman and the graphics mimicking Saul Bass's North by Northwest title sequence, which is a bit unfortunate.
But there's also some really kind of precise, and that's why I'm not actually that surprised to know that he developed techniques that he used later on. There's very precise camera movements in this film, like almost again. Almost an old-fashioned way of making cinema. My thing about it is that this is the only time where this old-fashioned notion about how to make films, that was already old-fashioned at the time. That's the first time that it creates an old-fashioned result. Before that, this way of defiantly going against the system and going, no, I'm doing it that way, even though we're not doing it this way anymore. It gives results that actually transcend that and become extremely modern. Whereas this isn't it.
Yeah, for me, because we have to remember and have to remind any, if we do have any younger listeners, that this was a period where TV was very much the second tier, even maybe third tier, and what I feel is the constraints of TV, in that. It is very contained, but not in a way that it's turned into the strength it could be, because the sets aren't brilliant. The you can see the budget constraints, and this was probably a higher budget. Well, it would have been a higher budget than Assault on Precinct 13 for sure, but it is not cinematic in the same way. It has its moments, and as you say, you can see the technique, but there isn't. It feels like he's not allowed to have the same control over the frame.
And I don't think he wanted it. I think genuinely he wanted to, he knew how to make a film, and I think he genuinely just wanted to see the inside of the factory now. Not that he didn't know what it was like, but genuinely being put through the meat grinder and see what comes out on the other side.
Because it is it's not
interesting.
bad.
Certainly
It's not bad. Yeah.
And there is some interesting plays on the whole notion of the stalker and it's essentially Rear Window.
It is, but also but
by adding this extra dimension of the killer wanting to be watched as well. So there's kind of a perversion on the whole thing.
So in the movie, we haven't summarised it because probably people haven't seen it. We should say this. So Lauren Hutton's character moves into this what's painted as a sort of high-tech new kind of high-rise apartment building. I mean, but this is a bad example of screenwriting because it's told, not shown, because there's no high-tech budget for anything to make it. So you're told frequently about certain parts about the data and the computer software, and yet you see none of that. And she is unwittingly targeted by a stalker who you think lives initially in the high-rise across, who's spying anything. And you have an earlier scene establishing that where he drives a woman to suicide, or allegedly does. And it's the story of how that stalker gradually ruins her life by taking control of certain things, of her environment, of her phone calls, watching her and monitoring her and following her.
It's about as close as Carpenter gets to the kind of female gothic thing of,
Yeah, but she's still not a cliche. That's the one thing I would say for sure, especially because it's showed on US television in this style of story. She is an unusual female protagonist for that period.
Yeah,
I would say.
no, certainly, but but again, I think it comes from Hitchcock again. That's the thing, and I think it's just one of those films where I suppose you maybe kind of took refuge behind the whole idea of, well, this is television and I can explore a little bit of my Hitchcockian obsessions without having to put myself out there too much, in a sense, because I think my main issue with it is it feels kind of risk free. To the point that spoilers, even the reveal is completely unremarkable. Yeah,
and also it's worth bearing in mind in the context of where he was in American cinema at that point. In terms of advancing your career, Spielberg started on Columbo, and then made Duel. So it was, he had made a couple of films, but in a very independent, low budget, blood and guts kind of way. And so this was very much a legitimate, potentially move that was slightly validated by Spielberg's momentum, because he was undoubtedly at that point following Jaws, and this was after Close Encounters as well. This is one of the ways you could do it and get your name forward.
But I think the part of the issue is that there's this there's things that actually, it's quite interesting, because there are things that actually kind of go back to Halloween. Earlier when we listened to your child's remarks on Halloween, what she noted is that she'd forgotten the face of the killer. What the reason that works in Halloween is, again, because this masked killer has been reduced to less or more than a character. It's been reduced to a concept, and so that works. That moment where the mask comes off and it's a non-reveal.
Yeah, and I think that he learned that on this. Yes, because I think he didn't intend that for this.
But the problem is on this, it doesn't work because nothing is boiled down to anything. It's a regurgitation of Hitchcock.
So this is a great example, isn't it? I think of where he saw how that was ineffectual and went, you know what, I can flip that.
Yeah.
And make a point of it. And I do think the guy who plays Michael Myers, when you see his face, looks very similar, younger, but very similar in a sort of way. Because when you see the killer in this at the end, you're like, really? That's very not interesting.
It's a non-twist.
Yeah.
You almost feel like there's a more natural way of there's a character in particular where when he came on screen, I was like, oh, so he's the... No,
do you mean Paul? You mean the boyfriend?
It's almost a twist that there is no twist in this movie. It feels, and it's not, not every film has to have a twist, but it feels like it's constructed in a way that leads you to believe that it's kind of a whodunit,
And it's not.
And it's not.
Because who did it, and and it's put, and that's what's so interesting, because he wrote it. Because I could have if I hadn't seen the credits, I would have sworn he hadn't written it, because it is flabbier. It is, but then equally he was hired to write it. That's one thing to remember, that he was brought in. He was asked to write something based on a real life thing in a high rise somewhere. I can't remember where, and he essentially wrote it on commission. So he was a writer and then filmmaker for hire on it.
I think there's also the possibility that it might have been a genuinely contemporary obsession of the creepy stalker who calls on the phone. I don't know how effective it is.
Breather,
I don't know how effective it is today. But then I've also seen it done better. That's the weird thing. When a stranger calls, the very long intro of When a Stranger Calls is so effectively creepy.
But the one thing it is, but the one thing that this did that I thought was picked up by Wes Craven for Scream was the ringtone. And that's lost now. It's not. But this does, in terms of the aural landscape of the movie, he does create. It becomes like a knife when it rings, and that's very effective. But equally, this was the first time that I also felt it was too long.
Mm.
Like you just.
And it's not a long film.
No, it isn't a long film, but it should have gone in there and been cut down.
It feels long.
It's probably an hour, really.
It's a very kind of baffling opening scene. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a beautiful shot of a kind of telescopic lens looking at a window, and then a phone conversation, which isn't really actually clarified exactly what the hell this is about. Is it the previous person who lived in the flat?
I wonder if it was revenge for the forced beginning of Assault on
I
Precinct
mean,
13,
I
'cause it
must
does
have
feel
missed
like
something maybe, but
No, I don't. I didn't feel it was unclear. I just, and this is the probably even when the films I don't like later, I wouldn't use this term. It felt clumsy.
it did feel like it was a very quick exposition moment that didn't need to be there. I think this is the weird thing.
But I think, but genuinely, unlike the Assault on Precinct 13, where we know that it was forced on him, I think this this is part. It does feel part of his structure. In this,
And I get how it works. I mean, it's a shock intro so that it sucks you in. But the problem is there is no, whereas Assault on Precinct 13 works because there's an explosion of violence, and Halloween works because it's like a mini film in itself.
Yeah.
The reveal that it's a child, the explosion of violence, and then the reveal that it's a child. The way that it works, the way that it's engineered to be like shock after shock. Whereas this just feels kind of irrelevant to anything that happens afterwards, other than being
I think
the exact same thing but repeated over an hour and a half.
I think it is probably the thing that struck me that was sort of most emblematic is I've never seen Adrienne Barbeau be so boring, and it's great that they met and fell in love and he married her. But everything, even Cannonball Run, she's more interesting than she is in this, and it was kind of remarkable how bland she was. And let's be clear about this. She plays a lesbian in late 1970s US TV. That's a big deal. So maybe she was made bland, so that they could get the lesbian thing over. Not that it ever. But then in a John Carpenter,
it doesn't really go anywhere though.
But that's what I mean. It's kind of quintessentially John Carpenter in the sense that she's gay, but to him that doesn't matter.
Which is fine. That's fine.
But then I did wonder if that was a botched red herring, that maybe she was the stalker. But
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I felt that about a lot of things, and this is what makes me feel like the reveal falls flat on his head. Is there's literally so many is it him moments.
Is it her?
Is it her? Who is it?
Yeah.
But when you finally figure out who it is, you go, oh, so that's the guy that we saw and we thought it was
at the beginning.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh well.
That's amazing. Okay.
Oh well.
Well, I mean, in a way. I mean, I guess it plays into Rear Window though, because that's the same thing with Rear Window is twisted. There is no twist.
It is, but then again, comparing it to Rear Window feels so.
But it's clearly a play on that.
Well, it is, but then but the reason I say I can feel the weight of the TV landscape on him is I don't recall any time he reused a shot in anything else. And there's that shot of that building is used over and over. This low angle shot. It's a nice shot.
It's a nice shot.
It provides the geometric Saul Bass rip-off graphic for the titles. But it's like, okay, and again.
But also, I think this whole thing where we're talking about being an American director who likes to dissect America through the lens of cinema and all that stuff, and he has a perfect chance to do that. There's even the line she says something. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but. She's saying something along the lines of, there's so many windows. It could be anyone in any of those windows.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting idea that he actually never explores. In fact, the guy you think is the guy is the guy.
And in fact, what Near's comment about for Halloween about the windows and things, and he's literally killed by the window in that she's shoved through it, and she. In one of the most unrealistic moments I've seen in a John Carpenter film, because she reaches repeatedly for this shard of window that's still in the window frame, and I'm thinking there's no way she doesn't cut her hand to shit grabbing that, but she doesn't, and she stabs him with it and then sends him out the window to his death. And I did, but it was so that was a bit on the nose that she says that line about the windows and he's killed by the window.
Yeah, but the fact that it's on the nose, it should tell you that he knows.
He knows he's on the nose.
He knows exactly what he's doing with
it,
and where
there
it should
wasn't
be
enough.
going.
But there wasn't either the budget or the ability within that system to make it more.
I think also that he just wanted to. I think he just wanted to prove himself that he could do it, and he did.
See, weirdly, for years I would have said, if you'd said to me, "What's the one film you really want to talk to John Carpenter himself about?" I would have said The Thing, or I'd have said Big Trouble in Little China. Now, if I got the chance to meet this filmmaker I revere, I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
I want to know exactly how it went, what he intended.
Because actually, the worst thing about it is that there are worst film probably in his filmography,
sadly.
but they are remarkable in a way.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is
no, they're very. By the time they get worse, they're very him. By the time they're very him, and that's what I mean about him sort of fermenting. Yeah. He's kind of like a wine that goes a little bit over, for me.
That's a strong wine,
gets a
but
little bit
it's still good for me.
Yeah, but see, he's a bit vinegary for me. It's still very much his vintage. Whereas this is like watered down.
Yeah.
To extend the metaphor,
yeah.
It's sort of I think I could have. I don't know. I was about to say I think I could have told you it was John Carpenter if I hadn't been told, but I'm not sure I could have.
It's not like there's a lot to indicate.
I think at best I might have said it's someone trying to rip him off.
The precision of the camera is there definitely, and that's something that just only improves from there actually.
But he wouldn't have. But also he wouldn't, for a TV movie. He absolutely wouldn't have had access to the same lenses, the same camera.
No, for sure. Aesthetically, it's not particularly pleasing.
No, it's a little bit ugly in places.
It's a bit brown.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I think of Columbo. It has that brownness, that beigeness of US TV in that period.
Yeah.
Which goes in some ways completely contrary to what's going on.
But that's the thing. So with Columbo, for example, I think it works. It's fine. The problem here is because we're talking about a John Carpenter movie. This is what I said earlier. This is the one of the only films in his career where I feel like he's behind the times. Mm-hmm. It's making something that even already at the time was kind of. It's kind of. You think about it. When was it released? 1978. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
You had Scorsese making films. You had Spielberg making films, and he comes up with a thing that you could have seen. You'd put a black and white filter on that and reframe it to a bloody.
And that's the difference. If you see
1:3 ratio.
If you watch Duel, that's a TV movie, but it just exudes cinema.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. The weird thing is maybe it's because it's Adrienne Barbeau and she's in the fog, but I did find myself thinking, God, imagine this same movie with Dean Cundy with the cinema frame. And I would love to see what could have happened with it.
Do you know what? The only weird moment that took me kind of out of my polite boredom was the moment with Vivaldi and this very lush suitcase that literally made me think Park Chan-wook was seeing this. At some point and going, not great, but this is beautiful.
Oh moment. I mean this is like Rear Window, but even more than Rear Window actually. It's a scopophiliac's wet dream because of the whole unpacking of the telescope, and it's like an unboxing video, isn't it? Ooh, look at the lovely case, and you go.
But again, it's kind of symptomatic because later Carpenter would have done something absolutely beautiful. You'd have caressed it with his camera, and
that's what I mean. Like,
if
you get Dean Cundy and you get the CinemaScope.
But the moment is interesting, though.
The moment
all of a sudden you have something that you go, oh, and it's not actually very usual for Carpenter either.
But you've said your
not
phrase.
Sure where it came from. No.
Your phrase "polite boredom" is right. I wasn't bored, but I was like only stuck with it because of who it was.
As a kind of, it's kind of like looking at a museum piece. I suppose it's not uninteresting. But there's something in it that feels old. And
I wanted him to
get. And it probably felt old then.
Yeah, I wanted him to get his hands dirty. Is the way I'd say it. Like you don't feel like he's really in it.
I think it's a calculation.
Although I wouldn't call him an exploitation filmmaker until maybe later. It's kind of probably where we slightly diverge, but I think he is later when his budgets go down again. This lacks that visceral quality. I think that's the key thing for me, the key word. That even Dark Star, oddly, is more visceral in its way than this is. And if you watch this as we have been, in reviewing these films, if you sandwich this between Halloween and The Fog, for God's sake, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Why would you? What? And that's where, yes, you can see elements, and in some ways, his status as a master filmmaker elevates this as a curiosity. Purely on just cinema, this is not cinema. it's a filmic exercise, and it's filmmaking in it, undoubtedly. But Halloween and the Fog arguably even more so, even though it's not as effective as Halloween, is incredibly cinematic. And that's the thing, and it's knowing that, and you can, and again, no, I'd want to know, and this is why I'd want to talk to him about it. Was that choice? Was that what you say?
I mean,
your hypothesis that he was working in the system, or was he just not able to?
My other idea is that he saw a chance to actually do, because TV unfortunately was not cinema then. Because we can argue today, what's the real difference really, other than the format of storytelling,
other than flabby as fuck storytelling.
Yeah, sure. I was saying it politely, but yeah.
No, I won't.
But I think he probably saw a chance to do to kind of take a step back in time in a way and actually do
a classical thing,
a classic thing, the way he would have loved to experience it in a confined space, in a kind of studio environment.
So it's like in his head,
where
it's
everything
like rope.
is controlled.
It's like Rope.
Yeah. But for TV, so
or Dial M for Murder,
lesser, which was lesser ambitions,
where Hitchcock had similar constraints, and you can feel they don't feel as cinematic as Vertigo. Or something. There are, but I mean, we're talking about Hitchcock. I mean, even bloody Juno and the Paycock.
Well, maybe.
The Trouble with Harry. See, there, you know what I'm saying. Nobody's perfect, but
no.
So that's interesting. So yes, I would say it's worth watching if it wasn't so bloody hard to find it.
That's true. I mean, it's
because you've really got to find this thing.
It's nothing shameful though. At the same time,
no, I don't.
But I would almost prefer it if it was shameful.
That's what I mean about it being not dirty
enough. It's kind of a non.
It's kind of like, in a weird way, and this is going to sound weird, but hopefully you understand what I mean. I kind of want it to be like Phantom of the Paradise, in sort of being a little bit crazy and unhinged, because the story sort of suggests that that's in there, and it's sanitized.
Yeah, there is hints of,
and not exactly like for like, but you know what I mean. A gothic Grand Guignol sort of feeling that could easily be.
I think he wanted to do something gothic. The whole gaslighting and
before gaslighting was a thing. Yeah, absolutely. So, pork chops. This is the first time where.
What did I say for Dark Star?
You said 3.
3 as well for this one.
See, I'm going to give this one 5.
Really? No, it's
No, but I've had my score probably affected by what we're now going to hear, which is interesting.
Okay.
So now, unlike the other films where we both have long held opinions about this work, and this was revisiting and pretty much rewatching them has just solidified probably what we thought to some degree. This is fresh. So this was the first time, probably the only time in this viewing exercise where our Gen Z Zoomer is seeing it as cold as we are.
I liked it, probably a bit less than Halloween, sort of, because it reminded me a lot of Psycho, and I think Christine, is that the one it's called? The one about the lady in the mansion?
Rebecca,
that's what. They're all kind of the same in this respect, because it's based on somebody stalking a woman, somebody trying to kill her, but not doing it in an overt sort of I'm gonna kill you way, sort of gaslighting and scaring. And I'm gonna say it goes Dark Star, and then this is probably tied with Assault on Precinct 13, because they're both very different movies, but I think I enjoyed them at the same sort of level, because although one's sort of I want to say action, and it is an action movie, and the other is a psychological thriller type movie, they both brought the same kind of, from watching Halloween, I could pick out a lot of why he's done certain design choices and angles with the camera and stuff like that, whereas in this one I was focused more on the storyline rather than the technical aspect of it. Up until the end, you never saw his face, well, not fully, because obviously you could see his eyes, lips, some of his hair, but up until she kills him, you never see him fully, and I think that's part of what he does. He wants you to only ever see them as a whole once or twice, because it feels much more sort of scary that way, not knowing who your attacker is, or where they're going to be, or how they're seeing you or watching you, which I think is quite interesting. I didn't like the police because I just thought, even for that sort of time, you could still pinpoint certain things that you could get a full-on investigation into her apartment for, because it's harassment, it's stalking, it's all that kind of thing. And I think them just brushing it off at first, and still kind of even them gaslighting her into saying, we've caught him, it's fine, it's done, still wasn't sanctioned, or even because if she's worried, even if she has a suspect, if she's looking into stuff and she's presenting you evidence, I don't think that they could have just brushed that off. I don't think that was particularly realistic. I think he does it well, just because anybody would be scared, especially a woman, if she's being called by a man in her apartment making threatening calls and saying, oh, I can see you from here and you can never see me. I know where you live, I know what you do every day, I can follow you if you want. And anybody would be scared, and I thought she coped with that very well. And she had coping mechanisms that you could see, like her friends and some unhealthy ones, like getting drunk and stuff like that, which I think would probably be realistic if somebody like the police weren't listening to you. You could tell he was experimenting with some things, because it wasn't like big going into a cinema somewhere. You could tell he was kind of interested in trying to work out how this was done, like I forgot what it's called again, there's the zoomy effect, the Zolly, that, because it wasn't as well done as some other movies I've seen it done in, but you could tell he wanted to work out how to do it, and he did it. And I think that in that respect you could tell he's trying to work out some things that he could use later on. I really liked the scenes when he got angry, because I think, or the scenes right after he called her, because the way that she put down the phone, she processed it, and then she had a reaction to it. I felt that was really well done, because it wasn't immediately that she got very angry and knocked all the stuff off the table. It was afterwards, after she had put the phone down and gone, oh no, and then gotten angry and then done all of that. And I think that was done really well, because obviously there's some adrenaline still, and you've got to wait for that to go down, and then you have a massive reaction. And I think that was probably one of the highlights, because you could see that she had really taken time to think about how she was going to react to it, and then done it. I enjoyed it more than Rear Window and other films of that sort of the same genre, sort of. And so yeah, I'd probably recommend it if you gave me if I had to either recommend this or Rear Window, I'd recommend somebody watching you.
Surprising.
Poor Alfred.
But I would have, if I'd seen this first, like with Dark Star, I think I'd have been apprehensive about showing it to her, that she'd be boring, it would be passive. So her reaction has really surprised me. I mean, I think I was a very good parent that I didn't lay into her for thinking it's as good as Assault on Precinct 13. But it is she does make some interesting points about the woman, and about how she's represented, and about how she processes it in a realistic way, and how her coping mechanisms. That is something which, I think is accurate, and perhaps is one of the reasons we're not willing to just condemn it.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's like I said, it's not an embarrassment of a film. Well, I'm just saying I would have preferred it if it was an embarrassment. It might have been fun. It might have been more fun if it was a little bit.
I mean, better than Rear Window?
No.
Probably
not.
No, sadly not. But that's okay. But
better than the version with Shia LaBeouf.
I think, honestly, part of it is the strength of the woman. the fact that that was a lot of her focus, and so I think a strength of this is probably that it was a bit ahead of his time in terms of how he portrayed women.
Perhaps. I saw it more as a kind of first step towards what would become the Carpenter woman in a way, that he then explored in because I don't think you can say that about Jamie Lee Curtis necessarily in Halloween. That's not even though he hints at it by who she is in real life, whose daughter she is,
Yes.
but the Hitchcockian figure that then he kind of appropriates and he does something else with it. There's sometimes he goes even maybe too far.
Well,
But there's moments in Someone's Watching Me where you can, the way that he films his actress, he uses that again to film actresses in different films, like They Live, for example. There's plenty of moments that reminded me of the way that he films his actress in They Live.
I mean, I agree with you about like the one of the things which does pull me out of the fog a bit is Janet Leigh's presence, and it's like, oh, calm down. You could see he was, spivving himself with joy when he in that one shot in the bar he pans from Janet Leigh to Jamie Lee Curtis. That's like, okay, all right. So I agree, and it is, Nia pointed out the Zolly, which we didn't discuss because perhaps we repressed it because it was a bad Zolly.
Really freaking horrible. Yeah, it's not great.
But then again, equally, I wonder, and this is again where is because the Zollies, the pioneering Zolly in Vertigo is a bit ropey, and this obviously it's not Roy Scheider in Jaws. It's not that moment, which is one of the finest Zollies. So
I think it's the main issue with it, outside of the technical execution of it, is that in terms of storytelling, it does absolutely nothing. It's limp.
Yeah, it is.
So it's kind of like...
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we should say, Zolly? Do you want to explain the Zolly?
Dolly Zoom, yeah. I mean,
so which way around do they normally do it? Do they push in and zoom out? It can be either way.
Yeah.
So it's where you push the camera either towards or you pull it away, and you do the opposite movement with your zoom lens, and it creates a sensation of your figure point of interest staying static while the background drops
because
away.
the parallax is changing at the same time as the zoom is crushing the perspective. So
Yes, and if you want to see someone showing off about Zolly, just watch Sam Raimi's The Quick and the Dead, where he does like 8 in a row. But it did have me on my feet clapping. Anyway, so an interesting curiosity, and if you are exploring John Carpenter and you want to get a full sense of his work, I genuinely think it's something you should see.
It's an interesting film.
Yeah. So on that note, having shook the pillars of heaven once again...
No, you're not going to get me to say anything like
God
that.
damn it. Where's my wang when I need him? That sounded strange.
Wow,
So
yes. Yeah, don't ever say that again.
You're not my wang.
No.
You're not my wang?
No.
Oh man.
Don't touch me.
Well, it's all in the reflexes.
It's all in the reflexes.